So I'm Nathaniel Rivers from St. Louis University. That's my hashtag at Sophist Monster. So Scott is as the handouts go around, but you don't really need them for the talk. They're just some of the highlights. So anyway, the title of my talk is Paying Attention with Cash, and okay, I'll take it away. So in multiplying compositions objects in response to what Rosie Berdodi, Carrie Wolf, and others call the post-human turn, we can spin out in any number of directions. Today, I want to refocus on attention, an object that continues to organize rhetoric and composition. Attention has always been woven into rhetoric, but I focus on it here for several kairotic reasons. Attention now sits at the intersection of cognitive science and technical and digital technology, which are both presently chief concerns within rhetorical studies. In the contemporary public imagination, as well, technology and attention tend to come as a pair. We can hardly discuss one without the other. And furthermore, cognitive science tends to be the ground of such discussions. For example, media scholar Clay Shirky recently banned some technology from his classroom, citing volumes of cognitive science research on attention and distraction. Attention, when discussing technology, becomes a litmus test, or at times, a shibboleth. Within and without rhetoric, attention is frequently treated as a possession that must be captured and corralled. As a limited and therefore prized commodity, attention is what must be secured in order to entertain or educate, to move an audience. This understanding has a history. It's part of our rhetorical tradition. I'm thinking here of Herbert Spencer's 1852 economy of attention. A reader or listener, Spencer writes, has at each moment but a limited amount of mental power available. This is why, for Spencer, rhetoric must be itself economical. It must husband the fragile sensitivities of our faculties. Or as Chad Wellman has recently put it, it's as though I wake up every morning with 100 units of attention, and it's up to me to manage them well. In our contemporary media-saturated world, we speak of and to audiences whose attention is increasingly divided. In his Economics of Attention, Richard Lanham writes, "It will be easier to find our place in the new regime if we think of it as an economics of attention. Attention is the commodity in short supply." While Lanham certainly would not recommend the perspicuity of Herbert's industrial rhetoric, both see attention as a prized commodity, pre-existing in and possibly stable through rhetorical interaction. While not an academic, and so perhaps neither a fair nor fruitful target, Nicholas Carr in his book The Shallows, and to a lesser extent his recent book on automation, nicely congeals the view of attention I want to complicate, or better yet, intensify. He unpacks the black box of attention in ways Lanham does not, but his tracing is not complex enough, or as I'll argue, risky enough. Carr is of course correct when he writes that attention is, quote, a genuine physical state, and it produces material effects throughout the brain. I neither want nor can take neuroscientists and psychologists and critique them and the volumes of research they produced on what attention is and how it works. However, I do think that it matters through which ontological assumptions that research is conducted and recognized. It matters, and the metaphors of control, brain, surplus, choice, and resource, while disclosing much, moves us, or Carr and his ilk, to work against rather than with digital technologies, which can only be ever seen as threats in such a metaphysics. We cede control, Carr writes, over our attention at our own peril. Attention is a finite cognitive resource that must be employed by intentional autonomous actors. For the sake of digital rhetoric and for productive but no less critical engagement with technology, I want to loosen all this up a bit, to cede control or acknowledge the precariousness of that control to begin with. As Thomas Rickert writes in Ambient Rhetoric, attention tends to the salient, but the bringing forth of salience is itself a complex activity that has ambient dimensions. So let's get out of Carr's own shallows and into some deeper, admittedly riskier waters. Rather than simply fitting digital tools into existing paradigms of attention, we can speculate as to what else attention might become, or what else attention will have been. As William James famously put it, everyone knows what attention is. Let's assume we don't. Working out of Bruno Latour, I argue that attention should be treated not as a uniquely human commodity, but as a composition progressively composed across human and non-human actors. Attention isn't simply an a priori human possession, but is instead a contingent attunement tightly bound to material relations across bodies, environments, media, and other non-humans. Smartphones, iPods, digital cameras, and Garmins aren't simply challenges to attention. They are part of what progressively composes attention. In short, attention is a thing with which we must deal. And I here take thing to be more robust than is typically presumed. In the introduction to Making Things Public, Latour reminds us that thing designated originally a certain type of archaic assembly. Before it designated that which was other than human, a thing was that which brings people together because it divides them. Far from passive and peripheral, things are what gather humans and non-humans together. They are seductive, sectarian, and solicitous of discourse. As a Latourian thing, attention is not what's brought to bear on, given, distracted, or captured, but rather what is always at stake in any interaction. It is an assembly, and it's one produced kairotically. To theoretically, methodologically, and pedagogically explore the intersections of attention and digital rhetoric, I'm going to describe a collaborative project I built around geocaching, an outdoor recreational activity wherein participants use global positioning system devices, so either handheld receivers or smartphones, to hide and seek containers called geocaches or caches, which is where I take the title of my paper. That's also what my son Will, who I think is listening, he likes to call them caches. He thinks it sounds cooler. So, a story. A group of students found a small geocache in the form of a magnetized container attached to the underside of a metallic trash can. Using a handheld GPS device, they navigated to the geographical coordinates listed for the geocache. In addition to these coordinates, students used the geocache's description, which included a hint to help locate the hidden container. This description was published on the official geocaching mobile application and website, after having been approved by a volunteer within the geocaching community. Inside the geocache container was a paper log that students dated and signed. Again, using the official geocaching mobile application on their GPS-enabled smartphone, they logged their find electronically, letting other geocachers know what they think about the cache and/or its location. In this case, adjacent to the fabulous Fox Theater in Midtown St. Louis. The students took a picture of the view from the theater from the trash can, which they chose not to post, as it of course gave away the location of the container. In finding the geocache, the students collaboratively wrote in a short reflection, "The hunter is rewarded with a wide view of the fox," helping them get an idea of the surrounding buildings and streets, which provides another way to observe the environment. This activity is geocaching, which I treat as a particular activity of attention formation through both digital and analog media, and as a synecdoche for the formation of attention generally. Geocaching also gets me to ANT, or actor network theory, and for much the same reason that Latour hangs on to ANT, despite not liking the words actor, network, or theory. The acronym, he writes, was perfectly fit for a blind, myopic, workaholic, trail-sniffing, and collective traveler. To watch someone geocache is to watch an ant at work. In his introduction to ANT, Latour articulates its 5 uncertainties. No group, only group formation, action is overtaken, objects to have agencies, matters of fact versus matters of concern, and writing down risky accounts, which all attend to the controversies that allow for, quote, the social to be established and the various social sciences to contribute in its building. And I list those on the handout. Traced through the uncertainties of ANT, attention becomes not an explanatory resource, but a lively controversy, which is fraught with and activated by risk and uncertainty. Attention has not yet been assembled once and for all. It is always being composed, and ANT helps us to trace this. With the first uncertainty, no group, only group formation, Latour is adamant that the duty of sociologists is, quote, not to stabilize the list of groupings making up the social. Rather than stabilizing, the work of sociologists is to follow the actors as they form associations. For sociologists, then, there can be no already formed groups to which they can then appeal to in explaining the behavior of that group. There is only the work of associating. Rephrased, Latour's first uncertainty becomes, there is no attention, only attention formation. An example of this comes from a collaborative student meditation on a median, which they were drawn to by the placement of a geocache. Both the median itself and the geocache container placed there attend to the formation of attention. They also seek to tentatively describe the ambience through which and within which salience emerges. So the students write, medians were installed as safety measures, mainly as a measure to prevent head-on collisions between opposing lanes of traffic, attempting to maintain established channels of road traffic. Medians create and are spaces in the middle of the road. These spaces, however, are not themselves designed to be accessible or particularly desirable by any notion of traffic, pedestrian, automobile, or otherwise. Here, a group of young scholar warriors intervene and recreate the space, charting a new understanding of the landscape within an already charted and often neglected space. Whereas the original recipe for the median called for safety via exclusion, these whippersnappers whipped up danger via inclusion. To access the median, these potential martyrs of rhetoric were forced to interact with, and as a result become part of traffic in ways discouraged by the design. My students are not, if nothing, dramatic. Now, it's easy enough to read this as a narrative of paying attention, but that reading narrowly focuses on the intentional behavior of the students rather than the mediated ambient environment from which salience emerges. That is, attention cannot be used to explain what happens here in the median. It is the median and its constituents that are assembling attention. Latour's privileging of formation, as we've already seen, is shot through with the second uncertainty: action is overtaken. The work of forming groups is not, strictly speaking, intentional. He writes, action is not done under the full control of consciousness. Action should rather be felt as a node, a knot, and a conglomerate of many surprising sets of agencies that have to be slowly disentangled. In this way, action is overtaken inasmuch as any action is shot through with mediators triggering other mediators. Attention forms in surprising, sometimes counterintuitive ways. A telling, if troubling example manifests this uncertainty quite explicitly. It concerns a geocache hidden adjacent to the Sheraton Hotel in downtown St. Louis. To set up the best view of the mural, which spans 3 sides of the building, the container was hidden near an underpass. The geocache is likewise near a light rail stop and a Greyhound bus terminal, both of which are well trafficked. This geocache becomes more or less difficult to find depending upon the presence of travelers and homeless individuals who likewise use the underpass for shelter. Several geocachers have commented upon this in their logs with varying degrees of either empathy or callousness. Quote, looks like a troll has taken up residence as bedding was left on centered left shelf. Didn't want to disturb same, so container may be behind. Another one writes, we also saw evidence that there may be someone camping out a few feet from the geocaching zone. Someone's belongings or blankets were neatly stashed nearby. And a third, watch for beggars. I had some change, so I got them to leave quickly. Attention forms here in several ways as a knot of surprising agencies beyond the intent of the student who had hid and described the geocache. Whatever attention might be composed by this geocache, its formation is forever shot through with others. Geocaching is both overtaken by the same and serves to record the other actors that mediate our attention. The above language of surprising agencies merges nicely with the third source of uncertainty. Objects too have agency. Latour argues there might exist many metaphysical shades between full causality and sheer inexistence. In addition to determining and serving as a backdrop for human action, things might authorize, allow, afford, encourage, permit, suggest, influence, block, render possible, forbid, and so on. In terms of Ant, the question to ask about any agent is simply the following. Does it make a difference in the course of some other agent's actions or not? Our attention, again, is not ours alone. Geocaching relies on locative media, portable media designed both to function while moving and to work within the confines of physical locations. As media scholars Eric Gordon and Adriana de Souza e Silva write, locative media are, quote, connecting us to the physical world and providing a framework for geographically locating social interaction. The reliance on locative media and geocaching discloses the constitutive force digital technology has on attention formation. It is with this understanding that Gordon and de Souza e Silva explore place-based mobile games such as geocaching as models for how network technologies make location matter. Digital networks, they argue, are connecting us to the physical world and providing a framework for geographically located social interactions. It's this connectivity that makes possible the other effects geocaching can produce. These effects inhere across the various media used to, quote, augment the physical world with hidden play pieces and provides a premise for which to travel through familiar and unfamiliar places. As Jason Farman describes, quote, the collaboration between the mobile device and GPS satellites that positions the body within space, yet it's the experience of space coupled with the reading of location that imparts meaning to the space. Our attention in space is generated at the intersection of bodies, media, and locations, which all influence one another. Farman, alongside Gordon and de Souza e Silva, emphasized the formation of both place and attention through social interactions mediated by networked digital technologies. Geocaching attends to the formation of attention across human and non-human actors. To introduce the fourth uncertainty, matters of fact versus matters of concern, Latour describes the experience of walking on a construction site and the troubling and exhilarating feeling that things could be different, or at least they could still fail. Such is the benefit of a construction site, which allows us to experience uncertainty far more intensely than we might in response to a supposedly finished project. Matters of concern, which balance matters of fact, introduce highly uncertain and loudly disputed agencies that are nevertheless real, objective, atypical, and above all interesting. The very act of geocaching something works to render it as a matter of concern. It's a practice of disruption designed to render interesting agencies. The example of the lounging woman geocache works here. A student writes in her description of the geocache, "This piece of art is something of a controversy. The plaque at the site indicates that the statue was created by the artist Michael Atkinson and named Emma, but other sources indicate this is not the case. In fact, most research points to the artist being David L. Phelps and that the statue's name is Nancy. Nancy was originally located on St. Louis University's campus, but was removed shortly after installation due to Nancy's risque topless lounging pose. Many were divided on the issue. Parents and students alike lodged complaints with the university, claiming it to be inappropriate and unnecessary. On the other hand, some were concerned that removing it would be a sign of too much censorship. Today, Nancy, or maybe Emma, can be found in her new home, removed from the campus, soaking up rays just a short distance from a frozen yogurt shop. To any parents with their children, keep in mind the woman in the statue is not wearing any clothes. Controversy attends to things, and attention emerges through controversy. Here we need to keep in mind Rickert's caveats regarding salience. To make something a matter of concern is not simply to actively render it significant, not meaning making exactly. To compose a matter of concern is to make something less solid, risky. Matters of fact are rendered matters of concern through geocaching, which is an activity with strong ambient dimensions. It's more than simply paying attention. The cold fact of the statue becomes a matter of concern through the geocache, its placement, its description, and the mediated means by which individuals come to access it. Again, we could certainly say that the geocache gets the player to pay attention, but it's more productive to see how attention is composed rather than grabbed. The fifth and final uncertainty involves the composition of what Latour calls risky accounts. Latour's description of risky accounts begins with him asking, how can we absorb so many controversies? He continues, it's because Ant claims to renew what it means to be a science and what it means to be social, that it has to renew what is an objective account. The word does not refer to the traditional sense of matters of fact with their cold, disinterested claims to objectification, but to the warm, interested, controversial building sites of matters of concern. Risky accounts increase exponentially the number of actors and associations that compose a social by tracing the ability of each actor to make other actors do unexpected things. The work of risky accounts brings us full circle to the first uncertainty. No attention, only attention formation. We see the opportunity for such risky accounts emerge everywhere we seek to discuss the activity of geocaching. What can we buy with the cache that is the opening up of attention provided by the risky account that is geocaching? The payoff for unpacking attention is the inventional potential. As another area of rhetoric wherein kairos, contingency, embodiment, and mediation are all at play. To become a speculative resource in order to imagine what else attention might be. Here, Jeff Rice's Digital Detroit becomes crucial as a model for tracing a network of attention at risk. Rice's version of Detroit emerges through the riskiness of his accounting procedures. His predilection for avoiding the normal and normative critical pathways or ruts of our centered academic moves informs my own risky account of attention. He writes, quote, the rhetoric that surrounds urban affairs from development to critique seldom takes seriously how and where multiple meanings within one or more categories may move in a given rhetorical situation or space. The relevance of Rice's work is clear when he advocates for, quote, a broader understanding of place that recognizes how various forces coming together, and we might assume breaking apart, lead to a place's shifting and moving status. Place moves. This is a generative way to position the locative activity of geocaching. I am interested in the complex interchanges of data that make up a given spatial relationship, Rice writes, and how we might engage with those exchanges for urban planning, rhetorical production, and technological applications. The example of geocaching works not to demonstrate how students can, despite worries to the contrary, be taught to pay better attention, but how attention itself is contingently refigured by material relations, in particular those mediated by digital technologies such as locative media. Moving forward in digital rhetoric, the task is not just to measure our new digital tools against attention, but to slowly trace the very composition of attention in action each and every time. This is the risky account full of matters of concern. Rather than more or less attention, could we think of different attentions, which are each complexly composed? What kinds of experiments would we construct? What unexpected results might emerge? The goal of a risky account is to, quote, trigger in a good reader this reaction. Please, more details. I want more details. I'm for the risky account of ant rather than for Carr's reactionary one. A qualitatively different kind of attention can be composed if we first treat attention as itself a composition. What might we in rhetoric have to learn from geocaching, which makes of attention a thing we collectively compose, human and non-human alike? Thank you.